here today. I am formally an early literacy coach from Kent ISD, and so I've been part of this network for several years. And then I moved to Colorado, so it took me out of my work in Michigan, but I've been fortunate enough to stay connected to this network as an independent consultant, and I'm thrilled to be here with you today. I've spent my last probably 5 years of my career deeply focused on student engagement, and I've really been thrilled to work so closely with Dr. Lallier on our presentation for you this morning, integrating everything that we've been working on in the network around essential number 1, around the enabling conditions, around asset-based orientation, and sort of looking at how that all fits together. And so that's really what our focus is going to be this morning, and with your role in coaching. So I'm going to share my screen. All right, so I want to start just with a very quick review of the enabling conditions. So Aaron's mentioned them. We talked about them in October quite a bit, and kind of want to ground us in that again today. So the enabling conditions and asset orientation toward children and their families and communities, positive relationships between and among teachers, children, and families, opportunities for children to develop healthy identities, culturally relevant, responsive, and sustaining pedagogical approaches throughout the day, and sufficient time for physical activity, meals, and play. So kind of keep those in mind as we go through this morning, and you'll see links to this throughout our presentation. So keys to engagement that we already know, things that we have been learning together in the network. So Dr. Muhammad's 5 pursuits are a big part of helping students to engage at high levels. And so just as a quick review of those: identity, skills, intellect, criticality, and joy. And we know that in our work, we are heavily focused on skills, but Dr. Muhammad's work has really encouraged us to infuse the other 4 pursuits, so that we're going beyond just teaching skills, we are teaching children, and the skills is just a part of what we are teaching them. Another aspect that we've spent time learning about is asset-based teaching, and Dr. Christy Cooperstein spent a lot of time with us in October around this. So we want to identify and celebrate student strengths, and as coaches, we also want to do the same with the teachers that we coach. We want to avoid deficit-based thinking, and sadly, we've been living in a world of deficit-based thinking for a very long time. So for many of us, myself included, this is a real shift, and getting ourselves to consciously start with assets, start with strengths, takes some effort. So give yourself grace if you feel like this is a bit of a struggle since October, if you've been trying this out and your default is still going to the deficits. Just, I have a little sticky note on my desk that says start with the assets, just to remind me when my brain goes toward the deficits to move toward the positives. And then we really want to focus on building on strengths to address areas for growth. And that's with both the teachers that we coach and the students that they teach. So what I want to focus on for the next few minutes is expanding our understanding of what we mean when we say engagement. And the picture that you see on this slide is of a chalkboard table that a teacher that I work with has in her classroom. And she was teaching her students about engagement, and she wrote the question on the table: think about a time you were engaged at school. What were you doing? And one of the things that we want to do when we talk about engagement is empower our students to take control of their own engagement. Because I think we've been living under a misconception that we are responsible for making sure our students engage. But the reality is that we can do everything in our power to make learning engaging for our students, but only they can choose to engage. We can't force them to be engaged. And in order for them to choose to be engaged, it's important for them to understand, what does it look like and feel like when I'm engaged? How do I know when I'm disengaged? What are my strategies for re-engaging? So this is a starting point for working with students around engagement, is teaching them exactly what is engagement. So I want to start with you by asking you to think about how we define engagement. So I'd like you to just take 1 minute and try to remember a time when you were deeply engaged in something. Think about where you were, who you were with, and what you were doing. And then I want you to, without describing the thing you were engaged in, think about how you acted and felt during that time. I'm going to give you a second just to think about that. And I'm going to ask you to, based on your thoughts about how you acted and felt during that time, think about a definition for engagement. And if your birthday is in January or February, write your definition in the chat. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to do that because it's a big lift to try to define engagement. But use that experience that you had to try to come up with a definition. Immersed in an activity, to be invested in or connected to. Thank you for sharing. Open and eager to participate. Interested and attending to the task at hand, feeling focused, cognitive dissonance. Now the chat's filling up fast, so I won't be able to read them all, but I'll pull a few. Focused on something and not allowing distraction. Choice and voice, constantly making connections, ignites positive feelings. All of my attention was there and at peace. That's a beautiful definition. When you are listening, thinking about, and immersed in activity. Curiosity and making connections. Fully present, listening, responding. Engagement is the act of being present not only in body, but in mind, with thoughts and feelings of connection to self and understanding. Okay, thank you for sharing those. And if you still have ones to share, please put them in the chat because we can all go back through and read them. So I think what all of these are saying is that when we are engaged, there is a level of presence for us in the activity. We're not easily distracted. We are feeling joy. Typically, when we're deeply engaged in something, joy can be a part of it. It doesn't have to be, though. We can be deeply engaged in something that is challenging for us or difficult for us, but is really compelling. So you'll see a picture on the screen of Ellen Oliver Keene's book, Engaging Children, Igniting a Drive for Deeper Learning K-8. And a lot of my work has been with Ellen Keene. I've had the great privilege of working very closely with her to learn more about student engagement. And in her book, she defines engagement as a state of flow. And what she means by that is just a lot of what you've been saying, that you are just in this focused state where things don't distract you. Time goes by, you blink and you feel like it's been 2 seconds and it's been an hour, and you are just absorbed. You're in this constant state of flow. And our goal is really to try to help students to reach that state more often in our classrooms. And I do want to say it's impossible for us to be at that level of engagement all the time. Our brains would explode. We can't handle it. So it's perfectly expected and reasonable to know that our students will not always be engaged at those high levels. But our goal is to help that happen more often. And thank you all for sharing in the chat. So as we rethink about what it really means to be engaged, and what I'm going to share with you on the next several slides is also from Ellen Keene's work. There are sort of 4 states that our students can be in, or our teachers, or ourselves, when we think about engagement. So the first one is compliance. And compliance really has to do with following the rules, doing what is expected of me in the classroom. So the focus is on behavior more than anything else. If you've asked your students to all be sitting quietly at their desks, and they are, they're being compliant. The next one is participation. So this is when we ask our students to do a task. We ask a question and they raise their hands. They answer our questions. They turn and talk to each other. They are doing the writing assignment we give them or taking the test that they have to take. They are reading the books during independent reading time. They're working in small groups with us. These are all tasks that we're asking kids to do, and they're doing them. It doesn't necessarily mean they are engaged in the work. It means they're doing the task. The next one is motivation. And this is really what it is that gets you to want to do the work. And typically, the motivation initially comes from outside of ourselves. Somebody inspires us to do something. Lisa Brown has inspired me in countless ways in this network to really push myself and advance my learning and my work. So thank you, Lisa. And so it initially often comes from outside of us. So our teachers are often motivating kids to do things, and they're doing it because they were inspired by the teacher, or even sometimes pushed by the teacher. Maybe they didn't want to do it initially. But then once they really get into it, the motivation becomes internal and is no longer dependent on somebody outside of us to push us to do it. And that's when we reach the point of engagement. And that's when we reach that state of flow, when we are fully immersed in something because we are interested, we are curious, we want to be there. Now we are engaged. So I just want you to take a minute and look at the picture on this slide and think about those 4 points. Can we tell by looking at this picture if students are engaged? Just put a yes or a no in the chat. Or maybe, if you think that maybe you can. Can you tell by looking at the picture if the students are engaged? So I'm seeing lots of no's pop up in the chat. I did see a couple yeses in there. So what I've discovered in my work, maybe, I see some maybes. Some kids look like they might be engaged. Some are not. So what I've discovered is we can look at students and we can make assumptions about their level of engagement. We can look at teachers when we do professional development and make assumptions about their level of engagement. I can look at your faces in Zoom right now and make assumptions about your level of engagement. But my assumptions are not always correct. And thank you, Danielle. Engagement can look differently for everyone. That fits perfectly with what I was just about to say. And Janine said they could be faking it. And that was also what I was just about to say is I am sure all of us have encountered students where we think they are really into that book they're reading. And then we sit down to conference with them and they've not been paying attention to that book at all. They've just been playing the game and looking like they're reading because they know that's what they're supposed to be doing. They're being compliant, often not really even participating, not even really reading the book. They're just being compliant. So we have to be able to move beyond walking through a classroom. My former principal would walk through my classroom and my kids would be raising their hands or turning and talking. And he would say to me, wow, your kids are really engaged. And I would pat myself on the back because I always thought they were. And then I began to learn more about compliance and participation. And I realized probably more often than not, my students were participating. I do know I had times in my classroom where many, probably never all of my students were fully engaged, but those times were nowhere near as often as they were just participating. And the only way we can really tell if a student is fully engaged is by talking to them. We can never tell just by looking. So I want to go on to what causes us to become deeply engaged in something. So I want you to think back to that time when you were deeply engaged. And you don't need to answer this question right now. I just want you to think about it. What factors do you believe led to your high level of engagement? What got you there? And as I go through the next several slides, I want you to think about those factors and see if you can connect them to what I'm about to share with you. So Ellen Keene, in her action research, really was able to, over a number of years, spending time with students in classrooms, identify what she called the 4 pillars of engagement. 4 major factors that lead us to become deeply engaged in something. And the first one of those is intellectual urgency, the sense that I have to know more. Engagement is born of intellectual urgency. Engaged children often tell us through talk and action that they have to know more about something. They're willing to put time and considerable effort into learning more. They drive the learning with their own questions. Often the experiences, concepts, and stories in which children are deeply engaged have conflict embedded. We're drawn to conflict and we lean toward a resolution. Children are intrigued by conflict, and they may want to act to mitigate a problem in their classroom, their community, or their world. They believe they just have to apply more attention to this text or idea. So I'm sharing an example with you of something that I saw scrolling through social media one day. I was on Facebook and I saw these 2 images of this painting, of this building, before a mural was painted on it and after. I just saw Annie's face go, holy cow. So exactly my reaction, Annie. I was like, oh my gosh. And my reaction to this was a million questions. How did this person create this? Is that really just painted? Like, I want to go and touch it and figure out, is it really just painted, or did they expand on that building and make all of those buildings there? And I just had a million questions and I had to find out more. So I started using the internet to do a search, and I found out that this is in Poland and that this one guy came up with an idea for painting a mural on the side of his building and worked with the artist who did it. And it was meant to reflect on the time of this district in Poland of the 1920s. It was meant to sort of bring back the history of the 1920s in this part of Poland. And it just absolutely fascinates me. I still want to learn more about it. The mural is titled "The Story of Stroka with a Trumpeter on the Roof and a Cat in the Background." And the title itself had me even more intrigued. I'm like, wow, of all the things you could call this, they pulled out the trumpeter on the roof and the cat in the background. And so it just made me have more and more questions. So just that sense of intellectual urgency. The second pillar is emotional resonance. It is reacting to an idea and getting into it with my heart as well as my mind. Engaged children can describe experiences when a concept is imprinted in the heart as well as the mind. They are far more likely to remember the idea because a strong emotion is tied to a concept they're learning or a text they're reading. Think about the books that we've read that bring tears to us during or at the end of the book. I've read some books where I've just sobbed at the end. Those books stay with me. What I've learned from those books have stayed with me because I have an emotional connection. Students may want to share their emotional reactions through writing, conversation, or artistic expression. So this is an example, in a recent example in my life, of something that I became engaged in because of emotional resonance. A few weeks ago, I was in Florida for a family event, and I was having breakfast with 2 of my cousins. And one of my cousins asked the 2 of us that were with him, if you could go back in time, would you have the internet be invented or not? And I was so blown away by that question. And of course, there was some intellectual urgency for me. And so one thing to know is the pillars often overlap. But more importantly, this really gripped me in an emotional way, because as our conversation progressed about the pros and cons of the internet, I started to realize the level of dependency I have on it. And as I started to think about all the good the internet has done, but also all the bad and all the potential bad as we look at now AI and all of the different things. They're such gifts to us, and yet at the same time, they are so, have been and can be so harmful. And so I started to think about, should I be using the internet? Should I try to live life without it? And just last week, there was an article in the Atlantic about a family who literally gave up the internet. And they happened to live in an area with no cell service. So all of their phone calls and everything were done through the internet, and they gave it up. And the article is about the pros and cons of doing that. And as I'm reading this article, my heart is starting to pound, and I'm like feeling like I'm breaking into a sweat because I'm trying to imagine living my life without the internet, and I can't get myself there. I wouldn't be here this morning. We wouldn't all be here together this morning without the internet. I would not have been able to learn about that mural in Poland without the internet. I mean, the internet is such an integral part of our lives. And so when I think about trying to give it up, I literally have a visceral emotional reaction to that. But it is such a compelling question that I haven't been able to let it go either. I continue to be engaged in that question. The third pillar is perspective bending. And this is the idea that other people can affect my thinking and I can affect theirs. And this is such a crucial and important idea to be teaching our students in this day and age, because we are living in such a polarized society. And one of the downfalls of the internet is how social media has created tunnels for us that we never see outside of. We feed ourselves with the things we want to hear, and we shut out the things we don't. And the idea of perspective bending is what leads us to be a cooperative and curious society. So engaged children are aware of how others' knowledge, emotions, and beliefs shape their own. When children talk and write about their beliefs, they're more engaged. They have a stake in the learning. They may be open to changing their thinking or beliefs when challenged, and they relish the idea that their ideas can impact others. Their beliefs may bend, just as ours might, but they rarely break. The idea is not to change somebody's mind, but to help broaden their perspective. And the last pillar is what Ellen calls the aesthetic world. And this is the hardest one for everyone I know, myself included, to kind of wrap our brains around. But it is the idea that this concept, whatever it is I'm focused on, is so cool. It's mine. It belongs to me. I'm drawn into it. It feels like it was put there just for me. It can be beautiful, hilarious, amazing. So engaged children can describe moments when they find something beautiful or extraordinarily captivating or hilarious or unusually meaningful. They might talk about a book or an illustration, a painting, an idea in science or math that seems to have been created just for them. They're drawn back to view it, discuss it, read it again and again. They claim the idea as their own. So the picture of the mountains that you see here, I feel so blessed to be living in Colorado now. And while we don't live in the mountains, we live right on the edge of them. And this fall, we took a driving trip through the mountains. And I was speechless most of the time, just absolutely captivated by the majesty and the beauty of the Rocky Mountains. And I can't wait to make this trip again in the spring. We've made it once in the winter, somewhat nail biting, but we did it. And just the mountains are different every time we go there. And it isn't an intellectual urgency. It isn't necessarily emotional resonance. There might be some of that, but it's just this sense of awe and wonder that captivates me and engages me in the space that I'm in. So, Joylyn, I see your question is Alan Keene's conception of flow based on the work of, and I don't know how to say his last name. And I do not know for sure. I can find the answer to that question for you and let you know. Let me just make a note to look into that. Okay, thank you for the question. So I also want to point out that the aesthetic world, when we first begin to wrap our brains around the concept of the aesthetic world, we tend to go to art and nature because those are things that we think about being beautiful. But it can also be just simple everyday things. So the photograph that you see here is of the top of a small little pint of ice cream. And I took it out of the freezer and I opened the top. And I was absolutely struck by, thank you, Sarah. Sarah said, yes, it is. I was absolutely struck by what I saw there. There was just this mound of these absolutely gorgeous crystals. And I didn't feel driven to like go grab my computer and try to figure out why this happened. I was just really struck by their beauty. And there's a closer up picture of the crystals, the shape of them, the lines through them. And I was just mesmerized. I could have probably stayed there for hours, except they were melting as I was looking at them. But it was just so fascinating to me that these crystals could form like that in my freezer on a pint of ice cream. I'd never seen that before. I'd opened pints of ice cream before with old gooey ice cream on the top, right? Like that's kind of what you expect when it's been in there too long. But I had never seen anything like this. I still don't know why it happened. It wasn't intellectual urgency for me. I didn't go research it. But I look at these pictures and I do remember that feeling I had of holy cow, and just how it drew me into studying those crystals. So now, as we look back at the things that we've learned and what I just shared with you around the 4 pillars of engagement, we can begin to look at how it all connects to asset-based instruction. So if we think about intellectual urgency, this connects directly to Dr. Muhammad's pursuit of intellect. And under the enabling conditions, it really fits with it kind of fits under all of them. But if we think about an asset orientation, that's something that students are deeply motivated to learn about. If we start with that as an asset, they want to learn about it, then we can have them more engaged in their learning. Emotional resonance connects to Dr. Muhammad's pursuits of identity and joy. And the asset orientation toward children, their families, and communities. And positive relationships can certainly lead to emotional resonance, and definitely the culturally relevant, responsive, and sustaining pedagogical approaches throughout the day. Perspective bending is directly connected to criticality, and also the enabling condition of the culturally relevant, responsive, and sustaining practices. And the aesthetic world is connected to identity, that sense of something was made just for me, and to joy. Often when we're experiencing engagement because of the aesthetic, that's where we are really experiencing joy. So we're going to look at some examples. I'm going to share one student example with you, and I'm going to kind of take you through, as a coach, how do we apply this learning? And then Dr. Lallier is going to take you through a teacher example. And after we share these 2 examples, I think we're going to have a break, and then there's going to be an opportunity for you to go into breakout rooms and look at 2 more examples, 1 student and 1 teacher, and try to wrestle with these ideas a little bit to begin to figure out how you can integrate all of this into your coaching. So the student example I'm going to share is a grade 2 example, and it's focused on phonics, which is essential number 5. The school-wide goal is to improve reading, decoding, and fluency in the early grades by focusing on phonics standards. So this is skills, right? We're focused on the skills. The student assets in the classroom, students demonstrate a solid knowledge of basic concepts of print. Students enjoy interacting with books through read-alouds. Students demonstrate a desire to read independently. Students view books and texts as a means to learn new information. So in 2nd grade, we have lots of students who are able to read fluently and independently, but we also have a lot of students who struggle because they haven't mastered phonics. And so really, these are the assets of those students who are striving readers and really working to be able to read more independently, but need some phonics instruction to be able to do it. So how do we integrate all of these ideas to help them engage in their learning and be able to apply the phonics that they're learning in their reading? So first, we want to start by embedding whole group phonics instruction in read-alouds. We know that the students are engaged in read-alouds. They like read-alouds. And so if we just pause periodically throughout our read-alouds to point out a phonics concept that we know our students need, that helps them to see how it's integrated into reading they're interested in. We don't necessarily want to take time, 10 to 20 minutes a day, to do a directed phonics lesson for the whole class. And the reason for that is that many students in the class already have that concept mastered. And so we are definitely not engaging those students. We're not using time to the best. And the students who don't have the phonics concept mastered are all at different levels that we can address in small group and individual instruction. So we want to provide small group instruction to build on what students already know. And in small group meetings, we want to use mentor texts related to the unit topic that we're currently teaching to teach and model. That is helping to connect the learning that students are doing around phonics to what the rest of the learning that they're doing in the classroom, and helps to give purpose to learning that particular concept. So we want to use the read aloud to model. And then initially, especially if it's a new concept for kids that we're teaching them, it makes sense to use decodable texts where they can practice that skill, where it's very clear and presented to them. And they're not focusing so much on content as they are on the skill. But then as they begin to integrate that skill into their reading, but they need more practice, now we want them to begin to apply it in a book of their choice, a book that they want to read, a book that is engaging for them, because now there's a purpose for them beyond just, you're telling me I need to be able to read these words. It's, I want to read these words because I've chosen this book and I want to read this book and I want to be able to use these skills to read these words. And that choice can be related to the unit topic that you're working on. So you don't have to make it a wide open choice. And it makes sense to have it be related to a unit topic, and I'll share with you why in just a minute. So during that small group time, you are going to use a text related to the unit topic to model the skill, teach the skill, and then you want the kids to practice it. And so initially, as I said, it might be in decodable books, but then as they continue to move forward, it's going to be in books of their choice. So how do we manage that? So during that time, you want to even get up around the table and sit next to or kneel by one student. All of the students are reading in their own books at the table with you. The student you are sitting by, you want them to read aloud to you. You want them to identify when they see that phonics concept in the text. You want to help them work through exceptions to that phonics concept, because we know those are as regular as the concept is. And then you want to work on setting a mutually agreed upon goal with that student. And hopefully it's one the student identifies, like, what is the next step for you in terms of using this skill? And you want that student to work on that goal before your next small group meeting, during their reading time between now and the next small group meeting. And then after you've met briefly with each student, come back to the whole group at the table and have each student share with the group something they learned from their reading that day. And that's where having them bring a book that is related to the unit topic you're teaching makes sense, because now they're all teaching each other something about that topic, something they learned from their reading that they can share with the group. And then in between your small group meetings, you want to periodically check in with the students to monitor their progress toward the agreed upon goal. And if you see that their progress is stilted, you can take time to confer with them and do some individual one-on-one instruction to help them progress with that concept. So how does this connect to the students' assets? So the idea of embedding whole group phonics instruction in read alouds is because students enjoy interacting with books through read alouds. Having students bring a book of their choice to small group meetings is connected to their demonstration of a desire to read independently. Setting a mutually agreed upon goal is also connected to their desire to read independently. If they understand that this goal is going to help them be more successful as independent readers, they'll be more driven to work toward it. And having them share with the group something they learned from their reading that day is connected to their asset of viewing books and texts as a means to learn new information. And we all know that students love to share their learning with others. And so giving them that opportunity continues to motivate them to want to keep reading. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lallier, and she's going to share the teacher example with you.
Thanks, Diane. And good morning, everybody. I'm still trying to find my voice, so I hope it lasts throughout this short little snippet of information or sharing that I'm going to do. And Diane really talked about if somebody's working with a teacher, how they can help that teacher use student assets in order to plan a really nice set of sequential instruction in order to accomplish goals around phonics instruction. I'm going to talk more about, as a coach, how you use teacher assets to to do your coaching work. So if we could see the next slide. The school-wide goal in this case might be something like to improve comprehension by focusing on reading standards for literature and reading standards for informational text. So again, we're talking about the skills that you're going to be working on through this school-wide goal. And let's assume that you and a teacher have decided to work together. Maybe the teacher has worked with you before and really feels it's beneficial as she moves into this new phase to continue the work. And one of her assets is that she really agrees with the importance of the school-wide goals focus on comprehension. She feels her students are doing well with their foundational skills, that this is possibly grade 3, and that they really have mastered most of the phonics skills well into work on fluency. She also has a good understanding of using interactive read alouds to focus on vocabulary development, because she and the coach and her grade level team colleagues have worked together in the previous year to really focus on their interactive read alouds related to vocabulary. So she understands that interactive read aloud process. Another asset is that she believes that she and the coach respect what each, excuse me, what each brings to the collaboration. And sometimes you don't know this exactly. The teacher doesn't say, oh, I really respect you, but she says things like, oh, you know, our co-planned lessons always go well because we each contribute ideas to refine the lesson steps, and then the implementation goes well. So you can often tell about that mutual respect from comments that teachers make. So this teacher has a lot of assets. She's ready to go with the goal. She has some background in using modeling from interactive read alouds. And she really believes that the coach is a great support to the work that she's doing with her students. So how do we move on from there? I think the biggest question at this point, because of the school-wide nature of the goal, is to consider, should the collaboration be extended to the grade level team? And why might this come up? Again, because it is tied to the school-wide goal. You also know that the teacher and the team have worked together well in the past, and that you have worked with them in the past. So maybe it's something that the grade level team would be interested in doing now. And when you talk to the teacher about, what do you think about some of your colleagues joining us? She said, oh, you know, our team really works well together on these big projects because we share the thinking and the work, some of that kind of bending the perspective so that I might give an idea and somebody else might give an idea. And we are working together to build something really good. So this particular teacher thought that at least we should consider moving it into a grade level coaching thing. So as you're thinking about you're working with teachers and looking at their assets, go ahead and think a little bit broader at the grade level or multi-grade levels as well. In this case, the coach, the teacher said, why don't you come to our next grade level team meeting and we can talk about what you and I were planning to do and see if there are other members of the team or the whole team who would be interested in joining the work. And it turned out that the other members of the team were really interested, and they listed some reasons why it might be beneficial for them. And they all agreed. Then we go back and look at the grade level team's assets. They all agreed with the importance of the school-wide goal. So you don't have one member of the team saying, I don't think comprehension is that important. It's you've got all three members of the team agreeing about the importance. Because they all worked as a team with interactive read-alouds, they really understand that focus. And they do, through their work together and through their comments, have a mutual respect for and trust in the work of their colleagues. So many of that one teacher's assets fits into the whole team's assets as we look for, okay, now how am I as a coach going to use these assets in order to help them develop a set of sequential steps toward this school-wide goal about comprehension. Excuse me for just one moment. When we talk about comprehension, or really almost any strategy that you're teaching, you might, as a coach, start considering, well, how am I going to use the gradual release of responsibility model as a foundation for our work? Because we want to do explicit explanation of these comprehension strategies. We know we have to model them. We know we have to provide guided practice with teacher support and with peer support, and we have to set up independent practice. So you could see almost the way that your coaching cycle is going to go, because you know that you're going to have to do all these steps with at least one strategy that you have decided to work on. This is a nice framework for working with a group of teachers who all want to see their students learn something new, move it from the beginning of explicit explanation into independent practice. And when we're looking at, it doesn't matter. When we're looking at modeling, just wanted to say that we're going to take that asset of using their knowledge of interactive read-alouds to use that as a way to model the comprehension strategy. And remember, that is part of one of the things under interactive read-alouds is to model those comprehension strategies. So as we continue on to look at what you might do, I think that we can go on now, Diane, thank you. Whenever we're coaching, we want to foster teacher decision-making. And I think that we want to look at what will help the teachers determine which comprehension strategy to focus on first. So it isn't that as a coach, I'm saying, well, let's start with this because it seems to be the easiest. No, what is it going to help? What do we need to do to look at, to help you make a decision about what to teach first. And I think the idea is that you want to foster teacher decision-making so that they can work together as a team once you are not there on another comprehension strategy or on any other task that needs to be done at the grade level. So when you're trying to determine that comprehension focus, you might be looking at the standards for the grade level, of course. You might be looking at any available student assessment data that you have related to comprehension. And you might be looking at the curricular resources you're using. Maybe at this point in the year, the part of the curriculum will focus on better on a certain comprehension strategy than another. So you kind of have to look at all of these things together to determine where are you going to start. And of course, you want to, if you're looking at read alouds and even at student texts, what culturally relevant texts might be used for read alouds. And I think that the idea that the asset that they really respect each other's ideas and work together really allows them to have this good conversation about what strategy we should work on and what texts we might be using. Once, then let us say you start by creating and implementing a lesson for modeling the strategy. And you're using interactive read alouds to do that. And there's a lot of implementation options. In many cases, the coach could model for all the teachers, taking one classroom and bringing in the other two teachers to watch, if that's feasible, according to the schedule. The coach could co-teach with one or more teachers. The teachers could go ahead and say, you know, we developed this great lesson. We each want to see how it works. You come in and observe so that we can talk about it later. And there's even an option where maybe one teacher says, I'll model it with my students and the rest of you can come in and then we can debrief that. So you have to think about all those implementation options. And again, look at teacher assets. Which of those teachers, and they should because they respect each other's work, feels comfortable having other teachers in their room while they're teaching, or having you in their room while you're teaching, while they're teaching. So you, excuse me, you have to know those teachers pretty well and their level of competence, comfortableness with you in their classrooms. Then you're going to, of course, debrief that implementation and determine the next step. For example, are you going to move on? Are you going to need to model that again? Were there parts of the modeling that didn't go so well that you felt the students needed a little more support? Or are you ready to go on to the guided practice stage? And then there's a lot at the end of final decision making that you as a coach have control, can help teachers make. For example, when are the students ready to go on to another stage of the gradual release of responsibility model? And when should they move from read alouds to student read texts? And in what ways can I as a coach support different teachers in different ways? And how are we going to informally assess where the students are at in their use of the strategy? And of course, what happens at the end of the coaching cycle? Do we look at the data and say, there's a small group of students that still needs work on this? Or do we say, let's move on as a group to a different strategy? Let's do the same thing we did with the first strategy and see how it goes? Or can that group of teachers, because they work well together, can they do that work on their own with you as a coach just checking in? So you can see that as we're in this particular case, we're using those teacher assets about their belief in the school, school-wide goal, their previous knowledge about teacher read alouds, their ability to work well with one another to make all the decisions that they really need to make in order to help students really make movement in the area of comprehension. So that's when we ask you that now to look at these examples and you practice. This is what we want you to do, is think about, okay, how can you use teacher assets or student assets or both in order to develop develop either good instruction for students, good coaching models for teachers. And I think that so the teacher example, you're going to have, oops, Diane, did you?
Yeah, Annie and Aaron, do we want to take a break now and then come back to this? Or do you want us to go through the instructions first and then take the break?
Yeah, the instructions first.
Okay.
Yep. Yep, instructions first, because then people can go to their space and you know, then take a break while they're in their space and then be ready to go.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
So Diane, did you want to put that document into the chat? Or I guess
Annie just did. Thank you.
So you're going to have a teacher example, and this teacher example is on assessment. As you can see, we're trying to get through a lot of the instructional practices. We've talked about phonics, which is 5. We're always talking about motivation, which is 1. We've talked about teacher read alouds. And now we're going to talk about number 9, observation. And then I think Diane's going to talk about 6. So we're trying to incorporate a lot of the instructional practices into this work today. So let's say that we, as your school-wide goal for your example, is to increase the use of observation and other forms of informal assessments to inform daily instruction. This should bring back a lot of the ideas that Dr. Wright talked about when she talked about informal assessments. So this is a school-wide goal. Let's look at the teacher assets. The teacher really does make observations. And as Diane says, we don't want to look at things from a deficit point of view. It could be that the teacher makes observations, but isn't writing those observations down. But the coach knows that she makes observations because of the comments that the teacher makes, like, well, I noticed that Henry did this, or that Alicia did this. And so one of her assets is that she's already making observations. Another asset is that she can do data analysis of benchmark assistance with support from the coach and from her colleagues. And this teacher also has a belief that the instruction would be much more successful if she could pinpoint some individual needs to work on. She really hasn't done that yet, but she knows that focusing on individual needs would be beneficial. So this is what she's bringing to the work that you have with a coach. And now your task in your small group is to think, as a coach, how am I going to get back to that school-wide goal of increasing the use of observation and other forms? Now you can make whatever assumptions you want to make about what area of literacy you're going to use for making use of observations and other forms of informal assessments. So you can build in whatever you want to in your little group, but the basic idea is, how are you going to use these teachers' assets to help them better use observation and informal assessments in their work with students? And then Diane is going to talk about the student example that you're going to be looking at.
So the student example is focused on Essential 6 and writing. And we know that lots of teachers and students struggle with writing, don't always have a high level of confidence. So we're going to look at that as an example. The school-wide goal is to improve writing by focusing instruction on students' needs and the curriculum, and increasing time spent on writing, including giving students extended periods of time to read and write each day. The students' assets we're going to assume in this classroom are that students display a sense of curiosity about their world. Students know they can gather information from a variety of sources. Students are able to verbally articulate their opinions and beliefs. And students appreciate that ideas can be communicated to others through writing. And as Susan said with the teacher example, when you're working in your small group to think about what approaches you might take in coaching a teacher with these students, you can make whatever assumptions you want in terms of, are they working on opinion writing? Are they working on personal narrative? Are they working on informational writing? But as you work through this and think about coaching this teacher, think about how you will build on the students' assets. And all of the school-wide goals and student assets that we shared are on the handout that Annie put in the chat. So you're going to leave this Zoom room and go to another Zoom room. I'll have Annie or Erin explain that again if needed. And so you'll have that handout in front of you. So you'll have access to the teacher assets and student assets and the school-wide goals as you work through these.
Sorry. Dr. Lallier or Diane, I think Dr. Lallier, you were going to clarify something because, we always are balancing our time and how in depth we should go with examples that we provide. And I think there were a couple misconceptions about an example provided this morning. And Dr. Lallier, you were able just in a message to kind of organize a way to think about that. So I'm going to stop sharing and invite you to clarify something for us.
In one of our examples this morning, I think that it was mentioned that the teacher was not going to use any whole group phonics instruction at this point. And there might have been a misconception that we do not acknowledge the importance of whole group phonics instruction. We definitely acknowledge the fact that a strong early literacy program needs systematic phonics instruction, and that it begins in kindergarten and goes until whatever your phonics instruction. Some stop at the middle of second grade, some stop at the end of second grade. It just depends on whatever program you're using. Some even go into third grade. But our example was a second grade example. And in this case, I think that if we're thinking of it toward the end of second grade, possible that most of the whole group phonics instruction had already been given for this group of students. And so in this example, the teacher is reviewing some of the phonics elements in the read alouds. And those would be the phonics elements that through assessment, the teacher has realized that many of the students might need a little review or reteaching, but it isn't. And then that, in addition to that, the teacher has created some small group instruction around the various elements, again, through assessment, what students need work on these elements, what students need work on these elements, that kind of thing. So in no way do we say that you do not need grade level large group phonics instruction. Of course you do. You need a very good systematic phonics instruction approach in your schools in order to introduce all those phonic elements, to reteach them when they're needed, and to determine which students need further work after they've been taught as a whole group. So if there was some misconception about how this particular teacher was working at this particular time of the year on phonics, it may be different than what we're talking about when we say we fully endorse a systematic phonics instruction program in every early literacy classroom. So I hope, Erin, does that clarify things?
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you again, Diane and Susan, and for all involved. Thank you to those who are involved in the Diverse Tech Set project. an update on their work is right there at lunch, and it is exquisite. The resources are so professional and supportive. We'll learn more about that in February, where some of our colleagues can share some of the lessons they're creating.